Imagine a world where artificial intelligence can write your news, create your images, produce your videos, and even influence the way you communicate with an audience. But there is a bigger question. What does this mean for Africa? What does it mean for our universities, our communication professionals, our students, and for the future of communication itself? These are some of the questions that will take center stage at the EACA 2026, hosted by St. Paul's University from 26 to 28 August 2026. I'm Professor Esther Mombo, Vice Chancellor of St. Paul's University, and it is my great pleasure to welcome scholars, researchers, students, communication practitioners, and thought leaders from across Africa and beyond to this important conversation. At St. Paul's University, we believe that the future belongs to those who are willing to understand change, question it, and shape it. And that is why this conference is so important. Artificial intelligence is transforming the way we communicate, the way we learn, the way we work, and even the way information is created and consumed. But technology alone cannot answer the questions before us. We need knowledge, we need research, we need innovation, and perhaps most importantly, we need ethics. For us at St. Paul's, this is the heart of who we are. We are a university committed to academic excellence, ethical leadership, innovation, and transformative education. We prepare students not simply to participate in a changing world, but to lead and shape that world. And as Africa embraces the opportunities presented by artificial intelligence and digital transformation, our universities have a critical responsibility to ensure that innovation remains human-centered, responsible, and relevant to our African context. That is the conversation we are opening at EACA 2026. We are bringing together ideas, we are bringing together people, we are bringing together different perspectives from across Africa and beyond. And we invite you to be part of it. Whether you are a student, an academic, a researcher, a communication professional, a technology enthusiast, or simply curious about where AI is taking our world, this conversation is for you. So from all of us at St. Paul's University, karibu sana. Welcome to EACA 2026. Welcome to St. Paul's University. And welcome to a university where faith, knowledge, innovation, and ethical leadership comes together to shape the future. We look forward to seeing you there.
God speaks to us that let it be full of grace. So grace is a way that God demonstrates, just as it is in Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 or 5 there, that God knows that the inclination of the heart of human being is evil. Every intention of human beings is evil. And from the third day of creation, we justified that by falling away from the intentions of God. But God demonstrates grace that, yes, I am powerful and able to destroy you. And he did that through the flood, gave an opportunity for redemption, and only one man had that, Noah, and he was redeemed with the whole of his household. So grace is God's demonstration that he is powerful. He knows that the many things, there is no human being that you teach them to do evil. No. We all are inclined every day to do evil, to do bad things against each other, to speak evil, to do evil against each other. But God directs us here in the Holy Scriptures that all our conversations be full of grace. Be full of grace means that grace of God is redeeming. Let every conversation we make be for the redemption of humankind and the destruction of the image of God to each other, to the environment. Let every conversation be sustaining. So we need to sustain conversations that we generate from the conversation we have today. And let every conversation be for the salvation of the world and humankind. And also salvation is common, but for the common good of everybody, for everyone. And that our conversations should be seasoned with salt. You know, salt is a preservative for the preservation of everything that is helpful and that is meaningful. It's not domineering. It's not for the dominance of anybody or any organization or any particular individual, or not for selfishness, but it is to keep and preserve humanity. Let AI be for the preservation of humanity. Let it be that which keeps us from being spoiled by anything, by anyone, or by any advanced or any advancement. Let every conversation add value. Let it not take value from anybody. Let every conversation be seasoned with salt, that it heals. It's for the healing of the soul, the mind, and the body. It is holistic. It has reasons for preservation. And that is what he says, and that you are able to answer to everybody, that it is a problem-solving conversation. It solves what grapples humanity, what grabbles and what disturbs and disrupts the world every day. It is for everyone, including everyone. Every one of us is everyone. Everyone, it means everyone. Us who are in the conversation, and for who are we making the conversation, and for what? Answer to the now questions, the now of us, and the now of the generations to come. So it is for today of us seated here, and let it be for the today of the generations to come, that this conversation will be answering and responsive to the problems, to the questions that will be raised or will be raised by the now of the generations that are to come. Because for us who are Christians, this chapter starts with Paul mentioning prayer. Prayer is a conversation. It's a conversation. It's not one way. You know, the challenge with Christians is that they will want to tell it to God, but they are not willing to be told by God. So conversation, prayer is a conversation. Evangelism is a conversation that we make. Human needs as well are conversations that we need to begin making. Make it for the now of us, and for the now of the, even learning in institutions are conversations. You are not teaching empty heads in a university. They are coming with already knowledge of the things they have known from friends, from environments. So they are not coming to class or to lecture halls empty, but they are coming already with a conversation in their minds of the expectation of the conversation that will generate from every unit that they will learn. Conversations that needs be purposeful. So make EACA 2026 a purposeful communication for a purpose. That it results in grace to assist resolve certain purposes of human existence. So EACA is a conversation that is gracious in communication in nature. Let it make it gracious communication in nature that is redemptive, sustaining, and to be sustained for the common good of the creation of God. Make it that. And let's purpose to make it that this conversation needs to change the flavor. The flavor. You know, when you are eating food without salt, it has a flavor. A flavor. Adding salt changes the flavor. So this conversation doesn't mean that there has not been conversations about reimagining. We are saying we want to reimagine communication. So let's change the flavor of the imagination of the communication we want to present as a conference, as individuals, as members of EACA. We need to change the flavor. EACA 2026, its 16th gathering at St. Paul's University Amphitheater, the University of Servants and of God and Humanity. We need to change the flavor of our communication, of our conversation. Season it with salt. That is what the scripture tells us, to season it with salt. So that as we reimagine AI, cooperation, and the communication and the conversations we want to achieve purposely through this conversation, that it should answer the questions of the now, our today. And the today of the unborn, the born, the unborn, and to be born generations. So that from this conference, praise the Lord, we reimagine, we make it gracious, sustaining, redeeming, focused not only for us, but there are solutions that other generations from us will say that EACA 2026 in its 16th gathering at St. Paul's University brought to us. In the name of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you're like me, but I was just sitting there thinking, wow, everything is coming together, isn't it? Yes? And it's amazing that God was the creator. He created once and continued creating. Isn't that right? Right? We're made in his image, and we are academics. We are pushing this idea of creation and reimagining through our research, through the gifts and the talents that God has given us. And yes, you may have done that one thesis, that one book, but it can have a life and it can keep going over and over again. And the idea being that salt is beneficial. It could be too much, but it has value. And here we're saying, who are we as people who have been made in the image of God, who create, and what kind of value can we make and give to a world that has questions about AI, that has questions about technology, about communication. And as we are talking about this, in this conference, we've had so many different days to converge in the different plenaries and the different breakout rooms to ask what communication means or looks like in our different domains and different fields, to look at what our communication has led us to thus far, to look at what even repositories and those spaces where we get the information to build the research, what does it look like, why are we concerned about it, who owns the research, how do we collaborate, what does collaboration look like or mean for us. We've had many different opportunities to keep pushing those questions to each other, and hopefully out of this we'll have recommendations, and that will allow us to keep keep up with the reimagination. I want to ask us as we go through today to use that analogy of the salt, that metaphor. How are we healing? How are we using our knowledge, our ideas, our communication to bring solutions? How are we also helping people to connect, to collaborate, and to do much more? And I loved what he said, the now of today and the now of tomorrow. As we go to the next session, I want to invite Dr. Kevin Dereva to introduce and welcome our plenary speaker, Dr. Edward Furi, who will go through his presentation for us in this panel. We'll be really excited to hear how they would help us reinterpret, reimagine communication in our time. Welcome. Please clap for them as they come.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ukaiko, for setting the pace, and to our chaplain, Reverend Ole Kiok. The metaphor of salt adding value to the things that we are doing in the context of the conversation of communication. The Reverend Dr. Edward Furi is a dear, dear friend of mine. I know him because we happen to serve in the same context. I wear another hat of being a minister in the Presbyterian Church of East Africa, where we do serve with him. As I think about that image of salt, I think that he brings salt to public conversations. Some of you may have interacted with his work on the Nation newspaper. He is a columnist, and he brings the ideas around faith and theology and what those mean for our common public life. And he is here to share with us on the topic faith and communication, and he has subtitled it Seeking an Alphabet for the Public Square. Faith and communication, seeking an alphabet for the public square. The Reverend Dr. Edward Furi is a minister in the Presbyterian Church of East Africa and the founder of the Institute of Ethics and Youth Affairs in Kenya. He began as a banker. He studied BCom and then sensed that thing that pastors sense, a calling, which I believe we also have, even all of us in our different spaces. We have our own unique calling. So he sensed a calling to serve in the church, and studied for an MA and an MDiv at Princeton Theological Seminary, and then eventually completed his PhD at the University of Pretoria. His work, as I read him and listen to him, he says he wants to bring an abundance to individuals and to institutions. And again, for those of you who interact with his writing, you will see this thread. This is, I think, the salt that he brings. He's a good friend and a dear brother, and I'm happy to introduce him this morning and ask us to give him a round of applause to encourage him as he hopefully adds salt to us today. And he represents wonderful people. You see from the profile, he is married and he has 2 sons. Karibu sana, Daktari.
Good morning, everyone. Very delighted to join this great conference with lots of insights, lots of new knowledge, and I think the word that has been mentioned here is a good word, imagination, reimagination in a salt perspective, right? So very delighted to be here, and the presentation I'm going to make to us comes from the perspective of faith and communication, and therefore the title, as has been mentioned here, Faith and Communication, Seeking an Alphabet for the Public Square. Now, I have watched pastors struggle to translate the good news into contexts shaped by other disciplines and professions. Many carry a church accent into every space they enter. A pastor will stand at a bank's corporate event and say, "Hallelujah!" And when no one responds, he wonders why the room is not as zealous to say, "Amen." Now, he cannot function without the amen. Instead of pausing to recognize that this is simply a different context, requiring a different register, he begins to reprimand the audience, asking why they have mouths, reminding them how many people in the world have none, suggesting they are ungrateful. And there is no bridge built between the church and the secular institution in the room. He is quite, in a literal way, lost in translation. Now he then leaves lamenting how hard the ground was. But was it? A more honest reading might be that he simply had not done the work. In biblical terms, had not troubled himself to, and I quote, learn the language of the Chaldeans, as Daniel and his friends did, to such effect that it shaped the entire trajectory of their influence in a foreign court. It is my conviction that theology, given the weight of its claims, should be able to stand on the platform of any discipline and make a genuine contribution. Why? Because it claims extraordinarily high. It speaks of abundant life, both now and eternally. Surely, a message of that magnitude has something to say to the very institutions and professions that mediate human flourishing in the present. Now, there are many such sins. Pastors caught in their own monolingual world, unable to step aside the church's native grammar. But good news, this good, cannot afford to be monolingual. Its broadcaster must be multilingual, almost by nature. Now, this scene played out in banks, boardrooms, newsrooms, and government offices across Kenya and the wider continent is a small mirror of a much larger paradox. Africa is home to one of the world's most vibrant Christian populations, and Kenya sits near the center of that vibrancy. Churches fill on Sunday mornings, crusades draw thousands, gospel radio and television saturate the airwaves, and yet the public institutions of African nations, Kenya included, continue to wrestle with crises of corruption, mistrust, inequality, polarization, and fragile civic cultures. Now, this is a paradox that should trouble any serious observer of African Christianity. A continent rich in theological conviction, saturated with religious language, and still searching for institutions that reliably reflect the values that conviction proclaims. The gap is not always dramatic or scandalous. Often it is simply persistent, a low hum of dissonance between what is preached on Sunday and what is practiced on Monday. In the newsroom, in the boardroom, in the courtroom, and now increasingly, yes, in the server room. Now, this paper argues that the paradox is not best explained by the absence of faith, nor even by an absence of theological seriousness. Kenyan Christianity is not short on conviction. It is better explained by an absence of theological translation. The unfinished work of moving faith's vocabulary from the language of worship into the working languages of governance, business, education, media, and technology. The church has cultivated a rich liturgical grammar, the grammar of worship, proclamation, prayer, and hallelujah, but has not always sufficiently translated the grammar into the moral, institutional, and professional grammars that shape the public square. Now, this presentation's organizing image is that of an alphabet for the public square, a set of foundational moral dispositions through which faith becomes intelligible and usable in public life, beyond the walls of the sanctuary. I will argue that constructing and embodying such an alphabet is not incidental to Christian communication, but constitutive of it. And that this task takes on new and specific urgency in an era of algorithmic mediation, synthetic media, and machine-generated speech, the very conditions named in this conference's theme. Now, our word on posture is warranted here at the outset, that this presentation is offered deliberately as a theological contribution to a broader interdisciplinary conversation about communication, ethics, and technology, rather than an attempt to restate theological claims in a religiously neutral idiom. Its value to readers who do not share its confessional starting point lies not in disguising that starting point, but in demonstrating in the very manner of its argument that what a distinctly theological voice can offer a plural public square that a purely technical or philosophical account cannot. Now let's look at liturgical fluency and institutional silence. Kenya and African Christianity, more broadly, has achieved a striking liturgical fluency. The vocabulary of worship, praise, prophecy, prayer, proclamation, is rehearsed weekly, sometimes daily, with genuine depth, emotional intelligence, and sincerity. Preachers move fluidly between exposition, exhortation, and lament. Congregations respond with equal fluency in call and response patterns inherited across generations. In this register, the church is not struggling, it is thriving. What has lagged behind is a corresponding institutional fluency. The capacity to translate the same conviction into the grammar of a boardroom, a newsroom, a ballot, a courtroom, or, yes, a server room. A congregation that can pray with theological precision for 45 minutes may struggle to articulate in the same 45 minutes what integrity requires of a procurement officer, what stewardship requires of a data engineer, or what reconciliation requires of a constituency still nursing the wounds of a disputed election. This lag is not merely a communication gap in the technical media studies sense of the term. It is a translation gap in the theological sense used throughout this presentation. The failure to move faith's vocabulary from the register of proclamation into the register of practice. The church has, in many contexts, become fluent in saying the kingdom and less fluent in building it. in the specific and glamorous grammar of institutions, professions, and increasingly digital systems that now mediate an enormous share of Kenyan public life. This is not a claim that African Christianity lacks social engagement. Church-run schools, hospitals, and relief networks testify otherwise. Rather, it is a claim that the moral grammar generated in worship has not yet been systematically extended into the professional and technological grammars where public trust is actually won or lost. Public theology is indeed a translation work. This presentation proceeds through an interdisciplinary engagement between biblical theology, African public theology, communication ethics, and social philosophy. It treats public theology not as a subfield concerned merely with church commentary or public affairs, but as a discipline whose central task is precisely the translational work named above, rendering theological conviction intelligible and actionable within the plural, often secular grammars of public institutions. Now, communication ethics, in turn, supplies this presentation's operative assumption that communication is never merely the transmission of information, it is the formation of relationship, trust, and shared moral reality. A society's alphabet, the moral vocabulary its institutions actually use to negotiate disagreement, allocate resources, and hold power accountable, is as much a communication artifact as its news bulletins or its liturgies. When that alphabet is thin, incoherent, or captured by cynicism, public communication degrades regardless of how technically sophisticated its media infrastructure becomes. Now, this is precisely the condition many observers describe in Kenya and African public life. Technically sophisticated media systems operating atop a thin and contested moral vocabulary. It should be said plainly that this presentation does not attempt to translate its theological claims into a religiously neutral idiom for the sake of broader accessibility. To do so would undercut its own thesis that faith's public vocation lies precisely in bringing its own vocabulary into contact with the public square, rather than dissolving the vocabulary before it arrives. Those who do not share the theological premise are also nonetheless invited to test its practical yield on their own terms. The 10-part alphabet developed a little later in this presentation, and its application to questions of truth, accountability, and artificial intelligence, again a little later in this presentation, are offered as usable contributions regardless of whether one accepts the incarnational theology from which they are derived. Now, this argument stands within a lineage of Kenyan public theology already engaged in comparable translational work. J.N.K. Mugambi's call for African Christian theology to shift from a paradigm of liberation to one of reconstruction, moving the church from the Exodus motif of protests toward the post-exilic motif of nation building, is itself an argument that theological conviction must be translated into the practical grammar of social and institutional reconstruction, rather than remaining confined to the register of liberationist critique. Now, more recently, Kevin Morethi Dereva the gentleman sitting there, has argued for a distinctly Kenyan political theology grounded in the church's own history of public engagement. Drawing in turn on Lamin Sanei's observation that Christianity has, from its origins, always been an act of translation. Now, this presentation's central metaphor stands in continuity with that insight. If Christianity is inherently translational, then the alphabet proposed here is simply an attempt to name that, to name what that translation concretely requires in the specific grammar of governance, media, and emerging technology. Now we look now at the public vocation of faith, specifically the theological translation. Now, using the metaphor of seeking an alphabet for the public square, this presentation contends that faith's public vocation is fundamentally a work of translation. This translation involves more than spoken language. It includes embodied witness, symbolic communication, institutional practices, and professional ethics. The public square encounters faith not only through what believers proclaim, but through the character they embody, the signs they create, the wisdom they cultivate, and the institutions they build. Now, translation in this theological sense is not a diminishment of the original message, but its fulfillment. A word that remains only in the language of the cathedral has not yet finished the work Scripture assigns it. The prophetic tradition itself models this. The prophets of Israel did not confine their speech to temple courts, but carried covenantal vocabulary into the marketplace, to the royal court, and the field of international politics, indicting kings, merchants, and judges in the same moral idiom used to address the worshiping community. The task of translation, then, is what allows the kingdom's vocabulary to become intelligible and actionable to a magistrate, a journalist, a software engineer, or even a member of parliament, none of whom may share the church's liturgical grammar, but all of whom operate within its moral horizon, whether they acknowledge it or not. Now, translation also implies risks. Unlike proclamation, which can remain safely general, translation requires specificity. Naming what integrity means for this procurement process, what reconciliation means after this election, what stewardship means for this budget. It is at the point of specificity that much African preaching has historically retreated into safer generalities. And it is precisely at that point that this paper insists the church must not retreat. Now, the theological grounding here is incarnational communication. This understanding of translation is grounded in the theological principle of incarnational communication. The word becomes flesh. Belief becomes practice. And proclamation becomes public witness. Christian communication is therefore not complete when faith is merely articulated. It reaches its fullness when theological convictions are embodied in human relationships, social practices, institutional cultures, and the structures that shape common life. The incarnation is, among other things, a communication event God's decisive act of translating the divine into terms a human community could encounter, touch, and follow. It did not remain a message announced from a safe distance. It took residence within a particular time, a particular body, a particular set of social relationships, subject to the same economic and political pressures as its neighbors. Now, if this is the paradigm for Christian communication, then the measure of faithful public witness cannot be proclamation alone. This question is not only, the question is not only what faith says, but what faith becomes what faith becomes visible as within society, in its schools, hospitals, newsrooms, courts, and increasingly in its algorithms. Now, this argument is deeply indebted to one of my favorite theologians, Ghanaian Kwame Bediako, whose concept of translatability made the incarnation itself the paradigm of the gospel's capacity to take root authentically within any culture rather than remaining tied to any single cultural or linguistic vessel. Now, where Bediako applied translatability chiefly to questions of culture and Christian identity, this presentation extends the same theological logic to a further domain, the moral, professional, and now digital grammars of the public square. If the gospel has always found its integrity through translation rather than in spite of it, then the church's task in governance, media, and artificial intelligence is not a departure from its deepest theological instincts, but a further instance of them. This has a direct bearing on how the church should understand its communicative task in a digital and AI-saturated age. If communication reaches its theological fullness only in embodiment, then a church that produces eloquent digital content, sermons streamed, verses posted, hashtags trending, without a corresponding embodiment in institutional practice, has, by its own theological logic, not yet completed the act of communication it intended. Let's now look at an alphabet for the public square. An alphabet for the public square consists of foundational moral dispositions through which societies learn to communicate and organize their common life: truth, justice, integrity, stewardship, reconciliation, compassion, wisdom, accountability, hope, and human dignity. Now, these are derived from the fruit of the Spirit, the Philippians 4:8, Paul's moral sieve, and from the cardinal virtues as well. These are not presented here as an exhaustive or final catalog, but as a working alphabet, letters from which a coherent public moral language can be composed, adapted, and extended by other traditions and disciplines. Each functions doubly as a virtue to be embodied by the individual believer and as a diagnostic criterion by which institutions and systems, including, as argued below, artificial intelligence, can be evaluated. Now, what follows is a brief working glossary of what I present here as the 10 letters, each named first as a personal virtue and then restated as a public institutional question. The first letter is truth. As a virtue, truth is the believer's refusal to deceive or be complicit in deception, even when falsehood is convenient. As a public criterion, truth becomes the question every institution and every medium must answer. Does this statement, this report, this broadcast, this generated image correspond to what actually is? In a public square increasingly populated by propaganda, rumor, and now synthetic content, truth is the most basic and most contested letter in the alphabet. The second letter is justice. As a virtue, justice is the believer's commitment to give each person their due and to resist complicity in unfair advantage. As a public criterion, it becomes a diagnostic for structures. Does this policy, this budget, this hiring practice, this algorithm distribute opportunity and burden fairly, or does it entrench advantage already held by the powerful? Integrity is also a letter in this alphabet. As a virtue, integrity is wholeness, the alignment of a person's private conduct with their public confession. As a public criterion, it interrogates institutions the same way. Does this organization's behavior match its stated mission and values, or is there a gap between the brochure and the boardroom? Another letter in this alphabet is stewardship. As a virtue, stewardship is the believer's recognition that resources, time, money, land, talent, are held in trust rather than owned outright. As a public criterion, it asks how financial, natural, and increasingly digital resources are gathered, held, and deployed, and on whose behalf. Data in this framing is not exempt. It is a resource held in trust about real persons, not raw material to be extracted at will. Another letter in this alphabet is reconciliation. As a virtue, reconciliation is the believer's willingness to seek repair rather than nurse grievance. As a public criterion, it asks whether a society's institutions, courts, truth commissions, electoral bodies, even church structures are designed to restore relationship after harm or only to assign blame and move on. Compassion, another letter in this alphabet. As a virtue, compassion is the capacity to be moved by another's suffering enough to act. Now, as a public criterion, it asks whether policy and institutional practice remain answerable to the suffering of actual particular persons rather than the treating people as aggregate statistics to be optimized around. Wisdom, too, is another letter in this alphabet. As a virtue, wisdom is discernment, the capacity to judge rightly amid competing goods and incomplete information. As a public criterion, it distinguishes mere information of which the public square now has an overwhelming surplus from genuine discernment about what that information means and what it demands of us. Accountability, a letter 2 in this alphabet. As a virtue, accountability is the believer's willingness to answer for their own conduct rather than deflect it. As a public criterion, it interrogates the diffusion of responsibility inside complex systems, bureaucracies, corporations, and now algorithmic systems where harm can occur while no single actor appears fully liable for it. A 9th letter of this alphabet is hope. As a virtue, hope is the theological refusal of despair, rooted in confidence that the present order is not final. Now, as a public criterion, it interrogates cynicism and resignation, the quiet civic disease that allows corruption to become merely how things are done, because no one believes things could be otherwise. And the last letter in this alphabet, human dignity. As a virtue, human dignity is the believer's recognition that every person bears the image of God and cannot be reduced to their usefulness. As a public criterion, it resists any institutional or technological reduction of the person to a means, a statistic, or, in the digital context, a data point optimized for someone else's gain. Now, taken together, these 10 dispositions do not constitute a theological system so much as a usable vocabulary, a set of questions any institution, policy, or technology can be made to answer, regardless of whether its designers or operators share the church's faith commitment. Now, one of my passionate persons, and I study him freshly each time, is Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And one of the things he brought out or constructed was what is described as the beloved community. And this beloved community is, to me, a theological translation. Now, this presentation draws particular inspiration from the public theology of Martin Luther King Jr., whose vision of the beloved community represents a powerful example of theological translation. King translated the biblical prayer, "Your kingdom come," into a public moral imagination expressed through justice, nonviolence, reconciliation, and social transformation. Now, King's genius was not merely rhetorical. It was translational in precisely the sense argued here. He took the eschatological hope of the kingdom and rendered it in the working grammar of law, economics, and civic life without evacuating it of theological content. His 1963 letter from Birmingham jail is itself a case study in this alphabet at work. An argument conducted simultaneously in the Register of Biblical Prophecy and the Register of Constitutional Justice addressed not to a congregation, but to fellow clergy who had counseled caution and delay. Now, the beloved community was never merely a slogan. It was King's own alphabet for the public square. His working translation of covenant, justice, and reconciliation into a program capable of reorganizing an entire society's civic life. For African and Kenyan Christianity, King offers not a foreign import to be admired from a distance, but a template for what theological translation looks like when practiced at civilizational scale under conditions of injustice not unlike those many African publics still contend with today. Familiar to us is Ubuntu, Utu, the African traditions of communal discernment. Now, building upon African traditions of communal discernment, Ubuntu storytelling, and restorative dialogue, this presentation also argues that Africa's contribution to the future of communication is not merely technological participation, but the articulation of a moral alphabet capable of shaping humane public life. Now, Ubuntu, most widely popularized through the writings and public witness of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, expresses a relational anthropology in which personhood is constituted through relationship. A person is a person through other persons, such that one's own humanity is inseparably bound up with the humanity of others. Tutu developed this concept most fully in the context of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where it functioned not as an abstract philosophical claim, but as a working public ethic, a moral alphabet, in the terms of this paper, that made restorative rather than retributive justice communicable and legitimate to an entire nation emerging from apartheid. Now, in the East African and Kenyan context, this same relational anthropology finds expression in the Swahili concept of utu, the recognition that authentic personhood is constituted through right relationship with others. To say of someone in everyday Kenyan moral speech that ana utu is to render genuine ethical judgment, not a compliment on manners, but a statement about the depth of a person's humanity as expressed in generosity, honesty, and regard for others. Its practical embodiment is seen in traditions that are such as Harambee, enshrined among Kenya's national values in our constitution, the pulling together of communal effort and resources toward shared flourishing, historically expressed in community fundraising for schools, hospitals, and disaster relief. Now, Ubuntu and Utu, though arising from different linguistic and regional streams, share a common philosophical core. Personhood is relational, not merely individual, and community in the crucible in which character, ethics, and communication are formed. Neither concept is naive about conflict or wrongdoing, but presuppose that harm ruptures a shared field of relationship that must be actively repaired, not merely adjudicated. This African anthropology is not incidental to this argument here. It is in fact indigenous confirmation of the same incarnational logic argued above, that belief is not complete until it is embodied in a relationship and structure. We look now at ethics, faith, responsible communication in the AI age. Now, this alphabet becomes especially urgent in an age when communication is increasingly mediated, generated, and amplified by artificial intelligence. Algorithms now shape what is seen, believed, and trusted. Synthetic media blurs the line between witness and fabrication, and automated systems make consequential judgments about relevance, credibility, and harm at a scale and speed no prior human institution has exercised. Now, in the Kenyan context, this is no longer speculative. Social media platforms already shape electoral discourse. AI-generated content already circulates during periods of political tension, and church communities themselves increasingly rely on digital platforms, some algorithmically curated, to disciple, inform, and mobilize their members. The theological alphabet proposed here functions as a diagnostic as much as a vocabulary. Truth interrogates misinformation, deepfakes, and algorithmic distortion of public perception, a matter of direct consequence in electoral seasons when synthetic audio and video can circulate faster than any correction. Integrity questions the design incentives behind platforms optimized for engagement rather than formation, and asks whether institutions, including churches, that adopt such platforms uncritically inherit their incentive structures. Accountability asks who answers for decisions made by systems whose outputs no single person fully authors or controls. A question with obvious application to content moderation, credit scoring, and public sector automation alike. Stewardship asks how data, itself a form of personhood extended into digital space, is gathered, held, and used, and by whom. Human dignity resists the reduction of persons to behavioral data optimized by prediction and monetization, insisting that a person remains a person even when represented as a data point in a training set. Global conversations on AI ethics remain dominated by frameworks drawn largely from individualistic, market-driven, and technocratic traditions. Frameworks that tend to treat ethics as risk management or compliance rather than as formation of character and community. Now, such frameworks are not without value, but they are incomplete. They can specify what a system must avoid without ever specifying what kind of a community a system ought to help build. Ubuntu and Utu together offer a communal corrective, a vision of personhood, accountability, and flourishing that resists purely technical or individualist accounts of responsible AI, insisting instead that a system's moral worth be measured by what it does to the relationships in which persons are embedded, not merely by whether it avoids discrete, enumerable harms. So Africa's theological and philosophical resources are therefore not peripheral to the future of AI ethics, but potentially formative for it. A continent that has already had to develop through Ubuntu, Utu, and comparable traditions, a sophisticated relational account of personhood and restorative accountability is usually well positioned to contribute to a global AI ethics conversation currently starved of exactly those resources. Faith's public task in this domain is not to retreat from digital and AI-mediated spaces in suspicion, nor to adopt them uncritically in the name of relevance, but to bring a moral grammar capable of evaluating them. The same alphabet this paper has argued the church must also learn to speak fluently in governance, business, education, and media. And in conclusion, we look from cathedral to society. We talk about movement from cathedral to society. And in an era of rapid media transformation and emerging artificial intelligence, the church's communicative task is to translate the language of the cathedral into the language of society, moving from proclamation to embodiment, from belief to practice, and from worship to the formation of institutions that reflect the values of the kingdom. This is not a call to abandon the cathedral's vocabulary, but to complete its journey to let truth, justice, integrity, stewardship, reconciliation, compassion, wisdom, accountability, hope, and human dignity travel from the sanctuary into the server room, the boardroom, and the ballot box, arriving intact and intelligible. The alphabet proposed here is offered not as a finished catalog, but as an invitation, a starting vocabulary for African Christianity to complete the translation its liturgical fluency has, until now, only begun, and a modest African contribution to a global conversation about ethics, faith, and responsible communication that urgently needs voices formed by Ubuntu, Utu, and the God who, in Christ, chose translation over distance and embodiment over proclamation alone. Thank you.
Another round of applause for that opening keynote, which comes from the discipline of theology, but as we have been saying throughout the conference, we are moving to transdisciplinarity. Transdisciplinarity. I remember our good professors who are here and our president reminding us of the same. So because of time, we can take maybe 2 comments. They can be by way of question, by way of commentary, response, expansion, all that. We can do that, and I'll borrow the lift that Dr. Nzengia was doing the other day by just speaking until I see a hand that is up. I was taking a lot of notes. Daktari, monolingual versus multilingual. We need to speak the different languages. And I think we have a good example here in Africa. For example, in Kenya, we speak at least 3. But I can see one hand is already up. I will pause there as we take a comment. I don't know if there's a mic that can roam. And then a lady can also speak, maybe preferably from this side, so that I can see those on my right and those on my left. Please go for it, sir.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Precious. I'm from Nigeria, and I study theology at Hekima University in Nairobi. Reverend Edward, thank you very much for your presentation. I have 2 questions. The first is twice, as I could count, you did mention African or Kenyan Christianity. I want to ask if you could say something concerning if there's a difference between African or Kenyan Christianity and Christianity in Kenya or in Africa. I ask particularly, I see you're laughing, because it's a research, it's an area that I'm specifically interested in, so if you could embody my research for me, I'd be most glad. The second question concerns translation without reduction. How do we translate theological language into the public square without losing the theological meaning and depth of those theological expressions? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Precious, for the 2 questions. Dr. Furi, I think you've taken those, and we can have maybe one last comment or question from this side, preferably from a lady, before we can conclude this morning plenary. Going once, twice. I had also numbers in the speech. I had, in Kenya we talk about 1 and 2, 1 term and 2 term to be more specific. But also today we have had 10 alphabets. 10 alphabets. Dr. Furi, please come and talk those 2 as we wrap up this first session for the last day of EACA conference, the 16th annual EACA conference.
Thank you, my brother. Just remind me your name. Precious. All right. Thanks so much for that response. And first is in terms of Kenya Christianity, African Christianity, and I believe it's part of your study because it is an interesting area in terms of understanding definition. But I would respond from the point of context, that more and more, not just theology, but the larger movements in the world, as much as there has been a globalization, there is a recognition that the local environments are very important, and they drive the global as much as the global drives the local. And so I would say that context remains a very important aspect. Actually, it's becoming more and more important than what it was before. So even as you think about Kenyan Christianity, African Christianity, those are both contexts. You can speak in terms of African Christianity, you can speak in terms of Kenyan Christianity, you can speak in terms of maybe Christianity in the coast. No, so it is in the whole elevated area of context. And so that is my response to that. That context is becoming very elevated, and and very impactful in terms of the way we understand and even embody the faith, right? The second one is about translating without reduction. That is really a very important question, but it requires for us now to sharpen another discipline, the discipline of discernment. We cannot translate without being people who are like discerning. And this discerning means that there's the whole combination of a consultation, but also the discipline of prayer as well, because that discernment is a combination of several things. So for us to check on reduction, then we need to elevate also discernment in the translation process. Thank you.
A round of applause for Dr. Furi for closing that out for us. I like those comments, local to global and global to local. I think when I think of associations in our different disciplines, for example, as scholars within the field of communication, there is that aspect in which we must be engaging as African scholars with what is ongoing globally in our field, in our disciplines. But then again, we are bringing our local contexts to speak, because it's again local to global and global to local. So I like that it applies not just to the conversation within theology, but also for us in our other different disciplines. So I think that's a good place to stop. And then saying discernment, and in research we talk about reflexivity, right? So we are using reflexivity in our research, so that again we are bringing our unique voices from where we are, because our voices must be heard. That has been the theme of the conference. I want to move the program back to the wonderful MC, Dr. Ukaiko Ojiambo herself. A round of applause also for her.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ndereba, and our speaker, Reverend Dr. Furi. We're so grateful in your presentation, in your piece. A very moving one that helps us to really, and I feel like this conference is really coming together, as I said, ideas converging. We're thinking about faith, we're thinking about practice, we're thinking about our professions and how we're making that impact. And what does it really mean to be people who carry faith within us and do the different things that we do in all our different disciplines, and what changes are we making, what actually are we doing, and how are we impacting people in those spaces? How are we making sure that people actually take in our messages, and not just the messages that are in print or the ones that we say at the surface, but always communication has that other level, that other, relational as well. As we know, it's not just what we say, how we say, but how do we bring people together when we do share our messages, whether it's on the pulpit, whether it's in the blogs. In this day and age where, the tea masters reign, right? They make the money. When they tell the lie about you and your life, they make the money. They get paid behind the scenes to tell the stories. But what is it about ethical communication and journalism? How do we make sure that what we are sending out there actually is salt and light? It brings value and benefit. And it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not, a theologian or not, but wherever you are, you do have the power, you do have the ability to bring people together. And as Africans, we say, we value that Ubuntu, right? In my culture where I'm from, we say mutum, mutane, people. Who is a person, and what are these messages for? Are they healing people? Are they giving people hope? I hope you got all that right, not to give his presentation again. But I feel like that is what I picked up from it, that we're actually all doing the right things and in the right places, and I think we're here for a reason. I'd like to welcome the next panel, the next session. We are going to have a session by Mr. Daniel Otunge and his group. So I want to welcome you to the platform. The session chair was supposed to be Professor Levi Obonyo, but he has let me know that he has been predisposed. So we have with us Dr. Chege, please come. Joki Chege, please come. I want to welcome you to the stage. And we have a rapporteur, Ms. Ida Mara, as well. Yeah, thank you. Round of applause, please. I would also like to recognize the presence of our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Abraham Waidima. Can we please give him a round of applause? Prof, I can't see you. Right, I was like, where is the Phantom Prof? Welcome. Please let's give him an applause. We're here because he has also allowed us to be here to share. Thank you. Welcome, Prof. I want to welcome Professor to just come and say hello. Thank you.
Good morning and hello. That's all I was asked to do. But what a joy it is to see all of you here, gathered from various countries. Always a joy to sit together to dialogue, and especially on this critical area of communication, artificial intelligence, and the list keep growing. I do not want to take your time. I want to sit and listen. I was supposed to be here at the beginning of the conference, but was engaged somewhere else. Yesterday, again engaged, but we are good. We are doing very well. And so, moderator, I want to return this mic. We are itching to hear. Thank you. Karibuni sana.
Thank you, Prof. All right, so I'd want to welcome the panelists to please take their seats. Dr. Njoki, kindly sit with Dr. Susan on that side. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Again, my name is Daniel Otunge. We have a panel discussion, as you can see in your programs, and it is on the application of solutions journalism to improve the impact of climate change on media coverage in Africa. So I have my panelists here who are going to talk to us about this topic. They are going to look at the various aspects, different aspects of this particular topic. But before that, I just want to take you through what it's all about. My name, again, is Daniel Otunge. I'm not going to say much. My brief bio is up there. But we all know that climate change threatens global development by affecting ecosystems, economies, and lives, especially in poorer regions such as sub-Saharan Africa, which is vulnerable due to its reliance on climate-sensitive sectors and weak infrastructure. The region faces more frequent droughts, floods, shifting rainfall patterns, increasing food insecurity, and water shortages. East Africa in particular is particularly at risk due to dependence on rain-fed farming and recurrent climate extremes that also affect health. Media play a crucial role, of course, in raising awareness and promoting responses. Currently, media coverage often focuses on crises rather than solutions. The panel will explore training journalists in solutions journalism, and we have Charles on the other side. I'm going to introduce him more to talk about the pedagogy aspect of it. And of course, the aim is to improve media coverage of the